Hello, my dear lore seekers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories. Tonight, our journey takes us not to a battlefield of clashing armies or a throne room of scheming kings, but to a quiet, dusty workshop in the heart of medieval Paris. We travel back to an age of shadow and superstition, a time when magic was a secret whispered in hidden corners, and the line between the mundane and the miraculous was perilously thin. Settle in, quiet your mind, and let us explore the life of a man who straddled two worlds, a humble scribe known to muggles, and a legendary magus known to wizards. He is a figure etched into the stone of Paris's oldest house, and a name whispered with reverence in the halls of Hogwarts. Tonight, we uncover the complete, true story of Nicolas Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now, let's begin. Our story begins not with a flash of magic, but with the mundane and methodical reality of life in 14th century France. The man who would one day hold the secret to eternal life was born Nicolas Flamel around the year 1330 in the town of Pontoise, a quiet market community nestled on the banks of the Oise River, not far from the bustling heart of Paris. His world was one of stone and wood, of horse-drawn carts and the ever-present tolling of church bells. It was a world where life was often short, and the mysteries of God and nature were vast and terrifying. As a young man, Flamel moved to the great city of Paris, the cultural and intellectual center of the kingdom. He did not become a knight or a nobleman, nor a priest or a merchant. He chose a profession that was both essential and almost invisible. He became an écrivain public, a public scribe. In an age when literacy was a rare and precious skill, men like Flamel were the keepers of memory, the facilitators of commerce, and the silent confidants of the city. He ran two small shops, little more than stalls, built against the cold stone wall of the church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie, a grand Gothic structure whose spire would one day be all that remained. Imagine for a moment the life of such a man. His days were spent in a small, cramped scriptorium, likely smelling of beeswax, old parchment, and the sharp, earthy tang of iron gall ink. For 6, perhaps more, hours a day, he would sit hunched over a slanted desk, a quill pen clutched in his fingers, his world narrowed to the words on the page before him. He would draft contracts for merchants, write letters for lovers, copy legal documents for the aristocracy, and perhaps on quieter days, reproduce pages of scripture for the church. It was a life of immense discipline and painstaking precision. The work was physically taxing. The long hours led to strained eyes from working by the flickering light of a candle, or the weak sun filtering through a small window. Scribes of the era often suffered from ailments of the body and mind, depression born of isolation, and physical exhaustion that settled deep into the bones. Each letter was a deliberate, careful stroke, for a mistake was not easily corrected. An error meant taking a sharp knife and carefully, painstakingly scraping the ink from the delicate surface of the parchment, a process that could ruin weeks of work in a single careless moment. This was Nicolas Flamel's world, a world of quiet diligence, of service, of words. To the Muggles of Paris, he was a respectable, pious, and utterly unremarkable man. And that, for a wizard in the 14th century, was the perfect disguise. The wizarding world of Nicolas Flamel's youth was a fractured and increasingly fearful society. This was an era of uneasy, fraying coexistence between the magical and non-magical communities. The International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy was still more than 300 years in the future, and so wizards and muggles lived in a state of wary proximity. Magic was not yet a complete secret, but it was a dangerous truth. Muggle society was growing more structured, and with that structure came a deeper suspicion of anything that defied their understanding. The first whispers of the great witch hunts that would plague Europe in later centuries were beginning to stir. Though wizards had their own means of protection, like the simple but effective flame-freezing charm, persecution was a real and constant threat. Because of this rising tension, the wizarding community was turning inward. Magical families were becoming more insular, their communities more hidden. Magical education was inconsistent, often conducted in secret within families or through informal apprenticeships. Great schools like Hogwarts in Britain had been founded centuries earlier as sanctuaries, but in France, the grand institution of Beauxbatons Academy of Magic was still a relatively new beacon of magical learning, having been established only a few decades before Flamel's birth, around the year 1290. Governance was not yet centralized under a powerful ministry of magic as we know it today. Instead, order was kept by a precursor body, the Wizards' Council, which struggled to manage the growing complexities of a world where Muggle sightings of magical phenomena, particularly at popular events like Quidditch matches, were becoming a serious problem. In this climate, a wizard who wished to pursue a life of quiet study, who wished to delve into the most ancient and powerful forms of magic without drawing the attention of suspicious muggles or the increasingly regulatory Wizards' Council, needed a life of profound discretion. Nicolas Flamel's profession was more than a job. It was a cloak of normalcy. As a scribe and bookseller, he had a legitimate reason to possess ancient, strange, and obscure texts. His quiet, pious demeanor and his connection to the church provided a veneer of unimpeachable respectability. He could move through the Muggle world, acquiring knowledge and materials, while his true nature remained hidden in plain sight. He was a man living a double life, not out of malice, but out of a necessity born from the times he lived in. And it was this quiet, unassuming life that would allow him to embark on a quest that would change the course of wizarding history. But he would not embark on it alone. In the year 1368, Nicolas, then a man approaching middle age, married a woman named Perenelle. History tells us that Perenelle was a woman of considerable means, a widow who had been married twice before, and who brought the fortunes of her previous husbands to her union with the humble scribe. Together, their wealth grew, and they became known throughout Paris for their quiet piety and remarkable generosity. They owned several properties, funded the construction of churches and hostels for the poor, and commissioned religious sculptures to adorn the city's holy places. To the Muggles who saw their names carved into the stone of these charitable works, the Flamels were simply a wealthy, kind-hearted couple. But the wizarding world tells a different story of their meeting. It is said that Nicolas and Perenelle first met not in the bustling streets of Paris, but within the sun-drenched halls of Beauce-Baton Academy of Magic, hidden away in the Pyrenees mountains of southern France. Beauce-Baton was, even then, a place of breathtaking beauty, a marvelous chateau of pale stone, surrounded by magically landscaped gardens and shimmering fountains. Its students were drawn from France, Spain, Portugal, and the Low Countries, creating a vibrant, cosmopolitan atmosphere. The curriculum was rigorous, on par with that of Hogwarts, but with a distinctly French character, perhaps with a greater emphasis on the arts, on etiquette, and on more subtle and elegant forms of magic. One can imagine a young Nicolas, already quiet and studious, finding a kindred spirit in Perenelle, a woman whose sharp mind and powerful magic were matched only by her deep compassion. Theirs was a bond forged not just in affection, but in a shared intellectual and magical curiosity that would define their lives for the next 6 centuries. And here, in the union of these two figures, we find the first, most crucial key to their legendary future. The great alchemical quest, the magnum opus, is an undertaking of staggering expense and dedication. It requires rare and costly ingredients, specialized equipment, and above all, time, decades, if not centuries, of uninterrupted research, free from the need to earn a living. For centuries, Muggles and wizards alike would whisper that Nicolas Flamel's immense wealth was the result of his alchemical success, the proof that he had discovered the secret of turning lead into gold. But the truth, as is so often the case, is both simpler and more profound. The wealth did not come from the alchemy. The alchemy came from the wealth. It was Perenelle's fortune, the inheritance from her previous lives that provided the foundation for their great work. She was not merely a supportive spouse who stood by her husband's side. She was the essential catalyst, the financial bedrock upon which their entire endeavor was built. Her belief in Nicolas and in the profound quest they were to undertake together was not just a matter of faith, but of material investment. She provided the resources that allowed them to retreat from the world, to purchase the rarest of ingredients from the darkest corners of Nocturne Alley, or the most exotic magical markets of the continent, and to dedicate their lives, their minds, and their magic to a single, all-consuming goal. Their partnership was a perfect conjunction from the very beginning. His methodical mind and her intuitive spirit, his scholarly diligence and her worldly resources. They were two halves of a whole, ready to embark on a journey that would lead them to the very secret of life itself. The true beginning of the magnum opus, the great work that would consume the lives of Nicolas and Nicolas Flamel, did not start with a potion, a spell, or a complex arithmetic calculation. It began, as the most profound journeys often do, with a dream. One night, long before he had ever heard the name Abraham the Jew, Nicolas Flamel dreamt that an angel appeared before him. The celestial being was bathed in a soft, golden light, and in its hands it held a magnificent ancient book. The angel's voice was not a sound, but a feeling, a thought that bloomed directly in Flamel's mind. "Look well at this book, Nicolas," it seemed to say. "You do not understand it now, nor does any other living man. But one day you will see in it that which no other will be able to see." Flamel awoke with the vision seared into his memory, a sense of profound and unsettling destiny settling upon him. He did not know what the dream meant, but it planted a seed of anticipation in his soul, a feeling that his quiet life as a scribe was merely a prelude to something far greater. Years passed. The dream remained a vivid, private memory, a strange and beautiful secret he shared only with Perenelle. Then, one day in the year 1357, fate intervened. A stranger entered Flamel's small bookshop, a man desperate for money who offered to sell a curious and ancient volume. The moment Flamel saw it, a jolt went through him, a shock of recognition that resonated with the memory of his dream. The book was large and very old, bound not in leather but in finely wrought copper, engraved with strange figures and characters he did not recognize. Its pages were not of paper or parchment, but of a strange, thin material that seemed to be made from the bark of young trees. The book contained 21 pages, or rather 3 sets of 7. On the first page was an inscription, identifying the author as Abraham the Jew, prince, priest, Levite, astrologer, and philosopher. Flamel purchased the book for the modest sum of 2 florins, his heart pounding with the certainty that this was the very codex the angel had shown him. He and Perenelle took the book back to their home and began the arduous task of trying to comprehend its secrets. It was immediately apparent that this was no ordinary text. The writing was a confounding mix of what appeared to be ancient Greek letters and other, more arcane languages that Flamel, despite his scholarly background, could not identify. But it was the illustrations that were most captivating and most maddening. The book was filled with hieroglyphical figures, complex and beautiful diagrams that seemed to hold the key to its meaning. There was a drawing of a serpent swallowing a rod, a desert with streams of water flowing through it, and a cross where a snake was crucified. Flamel understood, with an instinct that went deeper than knowledge, that these were not mere illustrations. They were instructions. They were the coded language of alchemy, the ancient and mystical art of transformation. For 21 years, the book became their obsession. Nicholas spent his days at his scribe's desk, fulfilling his duties to the Muggle world, but his mind was always on the Gilded Codex. At night, he and Perenelle would sit by candlelight, poring over its pages. She, with her steady hand and keen eye, would carefully copy the intricate figures onto fresh parchment so they could study them without risking damage to the fragile original. Nicholas consulted every scholar he knew, every wizard who passed through Paris with a reputation for knowledge of ancient languages or obscure magic. But none could help. Some dismissed the book as a fraud, a clever forgery designed to fool a gullible bookseller. Others recognized the symbols of alchemy, but could not penetrate their deeper meaning. The wizarding world of the 14th century, for all its wonders, had lost touch with the deepest, most ancient forms of this art. The knowledge was symbolic, spiritual, and philosophical, a language of the soul that could not be translated like a common text. The years of frustration began to weigh heavily on Nicholas. He felt he was the guardian of a profound secret that he was unworthy or unable to unlock. He and Perenelle had made no progress. The book remained as silent and enigmatic as the day he had bought it. Finally, driven by a quiet desperation, he resolved to undertake a perilous journey. He knew that the knowledge he sought, the understanding of the Kabbalah, and the ancient Jewish mystical traditions that seemed to be the key to the book was most likely to be found in Spain, which for centuries had been a crossroads of cultures and a center of Jewish scholarship. Announcing to his parish that he was undertaking a religious pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, a common and respectable journey for a pious man of his time, he set out, leaving the precious book in Perenelle's care. He carried with him only her faithful copies of the book's cryptic figures. For months he traveled, visiting synagogues and seeking out learned men, but he found no one who could shed light on the mystery of Abraham the Jew. Disheartened, he began his long journey home to Paris. It was on this return trip in the city of Lyon that his luck finally turned. He met a fellow merchant who, upon hearing of Flamel's quest, directed him to a man named Master Canchis, a Jewish physician who had converted to Christianity, but was said to be a man of immense learning in the old traditions. Flamel sought him out and, with trembling hands, showed him the copied figures. The effect was immediate. Master Canchis recognized the work at once, exclaiming that it was from the legendary, long-lost book of Abraham the Jew, a foundational text of alchemy he had thought destroyed centuries ago. The physician was overjoyed and immediately began to explain the first principles of the work, the deep, symbolic meanings behind the images that had confounded Flamel for 2 decades. He agreed to return to Paris with Nicolas to translate the rest of the Codex, eager to study the original himself. Their journey together was filled with excitement and revelation. For the first time, the book began to open itself to Flamel. Canches explained the symbols not as literal instructions, but as allegories for a grand spiritual and physical process. The path to the Philosopher's Stone, he revealed, was a journey of transformation for both the material and the alchemist himself. But tragedy struck before they could reach Paris. In the city of Orléans, Master Canches fell gravely ill. For 7 days, Flamel nursed him, but the physician's strength failed, and he passed away. Flamel was devastated. He had found the key to his life's work, only to have it snatched away. He buried his friend with honor in the Church of the Holy Cross, and continued his journey home, alone once more. Yet he was not the same man who had left. The conversations with Canches had given him the crucial piece of the puzzle he had been missing. He now understood the language of the book. He did not have the full translation, but he had the grammar. He had the key. Returning to Paris and to Perenelle, he knew, with a certainty that burned in his very soul, that the great work could finally begin. The decades of study that followed Nicholas's return from Spain were a descent into the very heart of magic, a journey that would test the limits of his and Perenelle's intellect, their endurance, and their spirits. The creation of the Philosopher's Stone, the magnum opus, is not a single act, but a long, arduous process of purification and transformation, a journey mirrored in the 7 stages of alchemy. Each stage was both a practical series of operations in their hidden laboratory, and a profound step in their own spiritual evolution. They were not merely making the stone, they were becoming worthy of it. The first stage is calcination, the black stage. In the alchemist's crucible, this is the process of heating a substance in a furnace, burning it with a slow, intense fire, until all its moisture, all its volatility is driven out, and it is reduced to a fine, black ash. For Nicolas and Perenelle, this was the stage of sacrifice. It represented their conscious, irrevocable decision to commit their lives to the great work. They began to systematically burn away the mundane aspects of their existence. Their social lives dwindled. They sold some of their properties, not for charity this time, but to fund their increasingly expensive research. Their world shrank to the stone walls of their home and the bubbling crucibles of their laboratory, a secret chamber hidden deep in the cellars of their house on the Rue de Marivaux. This was the burning away of their old selves, of worldly ambition, of the desire for comfort and ease. It was a period of intense focus and isolation, a deliberate severing of ties to the outside world. They were reducing their lives to the essential components, their love for each other, and their shared, all-consuming quest. It was their own dark night of the soul, a time of wrestling with the enormity of their task and the terrifying possibility that it could all end in failure, leaving them with nothing but ash. From the ashes of calcination came the second stage, dissolution. This is the process of taking the purified ash and dissolving it in water or a powerful magical solvent to break it down even further. The substance, having been purified by fire, is now purified by water. For the Flamels, this represented their total immersion in the cryptic knowledge of the Book of Abraham. Having burned away the distractions of their former lives, they now dissolved their own minds in the book's mysteries. They had to let go of everything they thought they knew about magic. The formal, structured spell casting they had learned at Beaux Batons, the conventional potion making of their era, all of it had to be set aside. The book taught a form of magic that was older, more elemental, more intuitive. It spoke of principles, not just incantations. This was a period of profound unlearning, of surrendering their intellectual pride and allowing the deep, unconscious wisdom of the text to wash over them. It was a frightening, disorienting time, filled with emotional turmoil. They were adrift on a vast, unknown sea of knowledge, and the only way forward was to trust the currents and let go of the shore. They spent years in this state, meditating on the symbols, debating their meanings, and allowing their own magical instincts to be reshaped by the ancient power flowing from the pages. After years adrift in the waters of dissolution, they entered the third stage, separation. In the laboratory, this is the act of filtering the solution, carefully separating the desired, subtle essence from the gross, unwanted matter. It is a process of refinement, of isolating the true substance from its impurities. For Nicolas and Perenelle, this was the great intellectual breakthrough. After immersing themselves in the book's symbolic ocean, they began to see the patterns. They started to be able to separate the literal from the metaphorical. They learned to distinguish a practical instruction for preparing an ingredient from a spiritual allegory about the state of the alchemist's soul. This stage was filled with moments of sudden, brilliant clarity. A symbol that had been opaque for a decade would suddenly reveal its meaning. A sequence of figures that seemed nonsensical would snap into place as a complex, multi-stage potion brewing process. They were filtering the truth from the mystery. It was a time of intense intellectual labor, of cross-referencing, of experimentation and careful documentation. They were no longer drowning in knowledge. They were charting it. They were separating the path from the wilderness. This led them to the fourth, and perhaps most beautiful stage, conjunction. This is the recombination of the purified elements, often symbolized in alchemical texts as the sacred marriage, the union of the Sun King and the Moon Queen. It is the moment when the separated, purified principles are brought back together to create a new, unified substance, greater than the sum of its parts. For Nicolas and Perenelle, this stage was a perfect reflection of their own partnership. It was the moment their individual strengths, now purified and refined through the preceding stages, merged into a single, harmonious magical force. Nicholas's patient, methodical mind, his scribe's attention to detail, was the sun. Perenelle's intuitive, compassionate spirit, her deep understanding of the living essence of magic, was the moon. Together, their magic intertwined, their knowledge combined, and they achieved their first great success. In the year 1382, as the legends claim, they performed their first true transmutation. In their hidden laboratory, with a small, carefully prepared quantity of the substance they had created, they touched a piece of lead and watched, breathless, as it shimmered and transformed, not into gold, but into pure, flawless silver. It was not the final goal, but it was the proof. The path was real. Their union, their sacred marriage of mind and magic, had borne its first fruit. It was a moment of profound, quiet triumph, a testament to their love and their shared devotion. But the path of the alchemist is never straightforward. Their success with silver emboldened them, but it also led them to the most dangerous stage of the work, the fifth stage: fermentation. This stage is a two-part process of death and rebirth. The first part is putrefaction, the rotting. The substance created in conjunction must be allowed to decompose, to die. It is often symbolized by the green lion, a powerful corrosive agent that devours the sun, representing the seeming destruction of the work. For the Flamels, this manifested as a catastrophic failure. In their attempt to move from the creation of silver to the creation of gold, something went terribly wrong. Perhaps they misinterpreted a symbol, used an incorrect ingredient, or performed a procedure at the wrong lunar phase. The result was disastrous. The beautiful, promising substance they had created turned black and inert in their crucible. It was dead. The work of decades was seemingly reduced to a foul-smelling, useless sludge. This was their moment of utter despair, the putrefaction of their hopes. They believed they had failed, that the great work was lost forever. But putrefaction is always followed by rebirth. As they sat in the ruins of their experiment, grieving for their lost work, a new understanding began to dawn. In the failure, they saw the flaw in their process. The death of the substance revealed a hidden impurity, a spiritual arrogance born of their recent success. They realized that to create gold, the metal of the sun, the symbol of perfection, they needed something more. They needed a catalyst of pure life, an element of resurrection. The legends are silent on what this was, but the lore of potions offers clues. Perhaps it was a tear from a phoenix, a creature of rebirth, an ingredient so rare it would have been almost impossible to obtain. Whatever it was, they found it, and with it, they returned to their dead substance and introduced this new element. This began the second part of the stage, fermentation, the inert matter began to stir, to bubble, to live again. It was being reborn, animated by a new, more powerful spirit. They had passed through the crucible of failure, and their work, like the mythical phoenix, was rising from the ashes, stronger and purer than before. This resurrected substance then had to undergo the 6th stage, distillation. This is the purification of the spirit. In the laboratory, it involves repeatedly boiling and condensing the substance, separating the volatile spirit from the fixed body, and then reuniting them, each time in a pure state. For Nicolas and Perenelle, this was the final painstaking process of refinement. It was a near-endless cycle of magical operations, a delicate dance of fire and water, of evaporation and condensation, performed in vessels of enchanted glass and crystal. We can imagine them working for months, even years, in a state of deep meditation, their wands moving in slow, precise patterns, their voices chanting the complex, multi-tonal incantations required to guide the process. Each cycle brought the substance to a higher state of perfection. But this was not merely a physical purification. It was a purification of their own intent. As they distilled the substance, they had to distill their own souls. They had to confront any lingering desire for wealth, for fame, for power over others. They had to ensure that their desire for the stone was pure, a desire for knowledge, for enlightenment, for a deeper understanding of the divine magic that flows through the universe. This is the true meaning of the stone's greatest protection, the one Albus Dumbledore would later place upon it, that only one who wanted to find the stone, but not use it for selfish gain, could ever truly possess it. The Flamels were living that principle, embedding their own pure intentions into the very essence of the stone they were creating. And so they came to the final stage, coagulation. This is the 7th and final step, the fixing of the purified, distilled spirit into a solid, stable, and perfected form. It is the moment when the elixir, the soul of the work, finally takes on its permanent, incorruptible body. It is the birth of the Philosopher's Stone. In their laboratory, after decades of toil, sacrifice, and devotion, Nicolas and Perenelle watched as the shimmering, volatile liquid in their final crucible began to thicken. The swirling energies within it slowed, coalesced, and with a final soft pulse of light, solidified. There, at the bottom of the vessel, lay a stone. It was not large, but it seemed to possess an impossible weight, a density that defied the space it occupied. It was the color of blood, a deep, translucent red, and it glowed with a soft internal light, as if it held a captive star. It was warm to the touch, and it hummed with a power that resonated in their very bones. It was the Lapis Philosophorum, the Philosopher's Stone, the Red King, the culmination of their magnum opus. With hands that trembled not from age, but from awe, Nicholas took the stone. He placed a simple piece of lead into a crucible and heated it until it was molten. Then, with Perenelle at his side, he touched the stone to the surface of the liquid metal. There was a brilliant flash of golden light, and the lead was gone. In its place was a pool of shimmering, perfect gold, purer than any that could be mined from the earth. Later, they performed the stone's other greater function. They carefully prepared a solution, the water of life, and into it they placed the stone. The liquid began to glow, taking on the same golden red hue as the stone itself, shimmering and swirling with life. This was the Elixir of Life. They had done it. After a lifetime of searching, they had unlocked one of the universe's greatest secrets. Their first sip of the elixir was not a moment of giddy celebration. It was a moment of quiet, solemn reverence. They had not conquered death. They had simply stepped outside of its grasp into a new and unknown existence, an endless ocean of time stretching out before them. Their great work was complete, but their journey was far from over. With the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, the lives of Nicolas and Nicolas Flamel transformed from a singular, focused quest into a long, unfolding study of existence itself. They had stepped off the path of normal mortality and onto the endless road of immortality. The first centuries of their new life were a continuation of the principles they had refined during the great work: quiet study, philanthropy, and a deep, abiding secrecy. Using the infinite gold the stone could produce, they began to enact their charity on a scale previously unimaginable. They funded the construction of 14 hospitals, 3 chapels, and 7 churches in Paris alone, their generosity extending to the city's cemeteries and almshouses. One of these charitable works still stands today, a silent testament to their historical reality: the house at 51 Rue de Montmorency, built in 1407. Carved into its stone facade is an inscription asking the poor laborers who were given shelter there to say a daily prayer for the souls of the deceased, a poignant reflection of the Flamels' enduring piety. But this life of generosity and quiet contemplation was shadowed by the profound burden of their immortality. The world they had known, the Paris of the 14th century, began to change around them. Friends grew old and passed away. The very fabric of society shifted. Dynasties rose and fell. They watched as the wizarding world retreated further and further into secrecy, culminating in the signing of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692. They were living ghosts, watching the parade of history from a lonely, unchanging vantage point. They had each other, a bond that deepened with each passing century, but the isolation was immense. They were relics of a bygone age, holders of a secret so powerful it could never be shared. The Elixir of Life kept their bodies from failing, but it could not protect their hearts from the slow, grinding pain of outliving everyone and everything they had ever known. It was this unique, lonely existence that eventually drew the attention of one of the few wizards in the world brilliant enough to even suspect their survival, Albus Dumbledore. Their first meeting is not recorded in any history book, but we can imagine it. It would have occurred sometime in the early 20th century. Dumbledore, then in his academic prime, was already a wizard of immense renown, a celebrated intellectual and a powerful duelist. But he was also a man haunted by his past. As a youth, he, along with his brilliant and dangerous friend, Gellert Grindelwald, had been obsessed with power, with overcoming the limitations of mortality. Their quest for the Deathly Hallows had been a reckless, arrogant pursuit of the mastery of death. That ambition had ended in tragedy, with the death of his sister Ariana and the sundering of his friendship with Grindelwald. The Dumbledore who sought out Nicolas Flamel was a changed man. He was no longer seeking to conquer death, but to understand it. He came to the Flamels not as a supplicant seeking the elixir, but as a scholar seeking wisdom. He was perhaps the first person in centuries with whom Nicolas and Perenelle could speak honestly about the true nature of their existence. In Dumbledore, they found a mind sharp enough to comprehend the complexities of their alchemy, and a soul deep enough to understand the philosophical weight of their immortality. A profound friendship was born, a meeting of minds that would span decades. This was the beginning of the famous partnership that would one day be noted on the back of Dumbledore's chocolate frog card. His work on alchemy with his partner Nicolas Flamel. Together, they explored the furthest frontiers of magic, including, as the card notes, the 12 uses of dragon's blood. But their friendship was about more than academic curiosity. It was a deep, philosophical exchange that would fundamentally shape Dumbledore's character. In his youth, Dumbledore had craved what Flamel possessed. But through his long conversations with the ancient alchemist, he came to see the truth. Flamel, drawing on 600 years of experience, would have spoken of the weariness, the loneliness, the feeling of being an eternal spectator to the fleeting beauty of mortal life. He would have taught Dumbledore that the elixir was not a victory over death, but a prison of endless life. He would have shown him that true wisdom, the ultimate enlightenment, lay not in avoiding death, but in accepting it as a natural and necessary part of life's journey. Nicolas Flamel became Dumbledore's moral compass on the very subject that had once nearly led him to darkness. Through Flamel, Dumbledore completed his own spiritual alchemy, transmuting the base metal of his youthful ambition for power into the pure gold of the wisdom and acceptance that would define his later years. This friendship, and the wisdom it fostered, would soon be tested. The shadow of Dumbledore's past returned, as Gellert Grindelwald rose to power, plunging the wizarding world into a global war. Grindelwald, like Dumbledore in his youth, sought to master death and impose his will upon the world. The Philosopher's Stone, the ultimate symbol of that mastery, would have been a prize of unimaginable value to him. While the Flamels were not warriors, their role in the war against Grindelwald was crucial, though hidden. Their home in Paris, a place of ancient magic and deep secrecy, became a vital safe house for the Resistance, a sanctuary for those working with Dumbledore. Flamel's immense alchemical knowledge and his centuries of wisdom would have been an invaluable resource for Dumbledore as he planned his strategy against the most dangerous dark wizard the world had ever known. The Flamels had lived a quiet life for centuries, but the rise of Grindelwald forced them from the shadows. They were the guardians of a power that could unmake the world, and they stood with Dumbledore to ensure it would never fall into the wrong hands. They had created the stone in an act of pure discovery, but now they had to defend it in a world consumed by a lust for power. Their quiet immortality had been thrust into the heart of the greatest conflict of the age. The defeat of Grindelwald in 1945 brought a period of relative peace to the wizarding world, and to the long lives of Nicolas and Perenelle Flamel. They retreated once more into their quiet existence, this time settling in a secluded home in Devon, England, to remain close to their dearest friend, Albus Dumbledore. For several decades, they enjoyed a well-earned tranquility, the great secret of their existence safe once more. But the cycle of history turned, and a new shadow began to grow in the wizarding world. A dark lord even more pathologically obsessed with conquering death than Grindelwald had been, Lord Voldemort. Voldemort's methods were different. Where Grindelwald sought power through the Deathly Hallows, Voldemort sought to shatter his own soul, creating Horcruxes to anchor himself to the mortal plane. But the goal was the same: immortality at any cost. The Flamels and Dumbledore knew that as long as the Philosopher's Stone existed, it would be a target of unimaginable temptation for him. When Voldemort fell for the first time in 1981, after his failed attack on the infant Harry Potter, they knew it was only a temporary reprieve. He was not truly gone. He was a wraith, a shadow of his former self, and he would need a powerful magical artifact to restore him to a physical body. The Philosopher's Stone, with its life-giving elixir, was the most obvious and powerful solution. Thus, in the summer of 1991, as a young Harry Potter was preparing to begin his first year at Hogwarts, Dumbledore and Flamel made a fateful decision. Gringotts, for all its security, had been proven vulnerable. The stone was no longer safe in its vault. They agreed to move it to Hogwarts, where Dumbledore could protect it under a series of powerful, custom-made enchantments. From their home in Devon, Nicolas and Perenelle became distant spectators to the events of that year. We can imagine their quiet anxiety, their correspondence with Dumbledore via Owl, as they learned of the protections he had put in place. A three-headed dog, a patch of devil's snare, a room of flying keys, a giant chessboard, a troll, a logic puzzle of potions, and finally, Dumbledore's own brilliant enchantment upon the Mirror of Erised. They would have felt a growing sense of dread as news reached them of the troll loose in the dungeons on Halloween, of the attacks on the Quidditch pitch, of the growing suspicion surrounding Professor Snape. They were watching from afar as a new generation fought to protect the secret they had guarded for 600 years. The life's work that had begun in a dusty Parisian bookshop was now at the center of a battle for the soul of the wizarding world, being fought in the secret chambers beneath a Scottish castle. When the news finally came that Harry Potter, a boy of only 11, had faced Lord Voldemort, who had been possessing the body of Professor Quirrell and had managed to keep the stone from his grasp, the Flamels must have felt a profound sense of relief, but also a chilling certainty. The stone was simply too dangerous. As long as it existed, it would be a beacon for those who, like Voldemort, feared death above all else. It would always be hunted. It was then that Nicolas Flamel had his final, long conversation with Albus Dumbledore. They both knew what had to be done. The stone had to be destroyed. For Nicolas and Perenelle, this was not a death sentence. It was a choice. It was the final and most profound act of their long alchemical journey. The creation of the stone, the stage of coagulation, had not been the true completion of the magnum opus. The true goal of spiritual alchemy is not eternal life, but enlightenment, the transmutation of the soul into a state of perfect wisdom. Their 6 centuries of life had been the period of study, of experiencing the state the stone had granted them. The ultimate enlightenment, the final transformation into gold, was the wisdom to understand that physical immortality was not freedom, but a cage. It was the acceptance that the natural cycle of life and death was the true, beautiful, and perfect state of being. And so, in an act of supreme wisdom, they agreed to let it go. Their decision was not a tragedy, but a triumph. It was Flamel's final lesson, the culmination of the wisdom he had shared with Dumbledore for so many years, when Dumbledore later told Harry that, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. He was echoing a profound truth he had learned from the only man who had ever truly had the choice. The destruction of the stone was not their end. It was their ascension. They had enough of the elixir stored to set their affairs in order, to say their final goodbyes. And then, together, as they had been for more than 600 years, Nicolas and Perenelle Flamel, the greatest alchemists the world had ever known, lay down their long lives and peacefully, willingly, embraced their next great adventure. Nicolas Flamel's story is a tapestry woven from 2 threads: the quiet, documented life of a historical man, and the vibrant, enduring legend of a magical one. The real Nicolas Flamel was a scribe, a philanthropist, a man of his time who left his mark on the stones of Paris. The legendary Nicolas Flamel was a magus, an immortal, the creator of the Philosopher's Stone. In the wizarding world, these 2 threads become one, creating a story of profound depth and meaning. It is a story about the pursuit of knowledge, the beauty of partnership, and the immense burden of a life without end. Flamel's greatest achievement was not, in the end, the creation of the stone. It was the wisdom he gained over 6 centuries of life, and the courage he showed in his final choice. He taught us, and he taught Albus Dumbledore, that the greatest magic is not to conquer death, but to live a life so fully and so well that you can greet it as a friend. His true immortality lies not in the elixir of life, but in the enduring power of his story, a story that reminds us that even in a world of magic, the most profound truths are often the most human ones. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the lore of Nicolas Flamel. I hope it brings you peace and comfort.